Hey there, rulers. Welcome back after a long week of Force of Will to the Teacher's Lounge, your favorite ever live Force of Will podcast featuring myself, Jeremy Franklin, and I am joined, as always, by Josh Patton, Brandon Bremont, and Mike Rance.
Oh yeah!
None of you guys decided to talk about the intro. I specifically I will say in my defense, I specifically didn't unmute you guys until I said Josh Patton's name, and then none of you talked.
I feel bad for all the podcast listeners, like the people that aren't on YouTube, that are just like, "What just happened?"
Yeah.
Just like, all right, cool. These mutes are on the stream. This is
great. This is great.
Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. We're not talking today. Enjoy us making hand gestures.
This is the
sign. The sign language only.
There we go. So,
very few sign language.
Before we get started, as always, I do want to thank everyone who is hanging out in the chat with us, as well as those who are just viewing with us, for your support and being a part of it. We love being engaged with you in this way and being able to bring you this content. If you like what we do, please consider clicking that subscribe button down below, as well as if you want to support us directly, click that join button down below. It is the easiest way to support us financially. It is way more beneficial than just watching the videos and getting ad revenue, and it gets you all kinds of access to cool perks, like being in the chat where you see Ryan Miles spamming his emote of Hanzo, and all kinds of other cool stuff. The more members we have, the more cool stuff we could do, the more equipment we can purchase to make more and more cooler videos. It is the easiest way to directly support us. Now, with that out of the way, let's jump into today's topic, specifically trees. We're talking about a lot of trees. I've been seeing a lot of people
planting trees,
save the trees. We're trying to save the earth. Specifically, we're trying to talk about decision trees. This has been something that's been brought up a couple of times over the past couple of weeks in the Force of Will Global community, and I kind of want to just hedge the topic. Man, it's going to be tree puns all day. Hedge the topic to make sure people understand what we're talking about when we say decision trees, as well as how to make the best decisions and how to set yourself up to be able to recognize those decision trees and how to prune them or tend to them properly so that you get the best harvest.
If you don't stop with these tree puns, I'm going to leave right now.
Jeremy, stop being such a sap.
There we go.
I cannot follow that up. Like, I am not on point level.
Yeah, if we can get, I think at this point we need 6 more members to get our next emote. And so if we can do 6 more members by the end of the podcast tonight, the next emote will 100% be a new Keurig. Well, actually, no. We'll get a new Keurig emote for Foul Ryan, just to spite Ryan. So 6 members by the end of tonight, starting after Taylor, who has joined us. Taylor, thank you so much for becoming as a member.
Also, if all the new members could definitely just put like tree and leaf and plant puns as they become members, just so that we can have that'd be perfect.
Yeah, just say that in there. It's super great.
Yeah.
So a lot of this has come up. This discussion of decision trees has come up a lot as we've seen people wondering about a lot of cards that have a lot of different ways that you can play them, a lot of different ways that you can make use of them, a lot of different modal kind of concepts, or like when to use something, how to use something. For instance, cards like Pierre, cards like Mikage, cards like the different modal spells that have been given to every single ruler throughout this cluster. Even things like even the rulers themselves, like the Regalia, like what modes to pick when you play the Regalia win, and those kinds of things. Also, codename Tobias, welcome as a student. There you go. Happy to have you here. Thank you very much. So for those, so that I'm not the only one talking, does someone want to kind of explain their thought on what exactly is a decision tree? Like, what do we say when we're bringing up that concept?
So you can isolate lots of different decisions that you make in a game, like into individual events, and then how you're going to respond to those events. I have a Kaguya in my hand. It's turn 2. They're resolving Winds of the Archangel. I can do nothing, say resolve. I can cast Kaguya. I can concede the match. Like I can do all these different things. And it makes sense in some situations to think about that. Like, nothing else has happened. I have a grip of 5. I have nothing else that I'm going to do. I have a Kaguya. They're playing wings. What do I do? And that is individually interesting, and we can talk about that. But perhaps even more interesting is what comes of that. And that's where the tree starts to come out. If I cancel, I go to my next turn, I recover, I can chant on 1, I can do other things with that 2 mana. They didn't have anything they could do, but if I do let it resolve, what do they get out of their wings? Maybe I have a Seal of Lenneth in my hand that wasn't getting much use in this matchup anyway, so I let it resolve. Okay, they don't have anything they're going to draw off of, they're just an Arla, they're going to get rid of 2 cards. Maybe I can go call a stone, seal it, and still have Kaguya mana. And so then when we think about that, that's when we can kind of start to see this tree develop. It's not necessarily an isolated question of what do I do in this particular situation. It's what did I do in this situation? What is going to become of that? And part of taking your Force of Will game from this level 1, what is the correct decision here, to this level 2, what is the correct decision over the course of this entire game, with how I'm envisioning this playing out, with what's in my hand, with what my opponent has seemed to indicate that they could possibly have, with my knowledge of the meta and what I think their deck could possibly contain. And so really it's not so much a let's look at this big chart of things that could have happened, because that gets infinitely complex. You're never really going to be able to follow, like, what if I literally played nothing this entire game, what would have happened kind of logic. But what we can invite is the opportunity to look back at the game and say, how would this have played out differently if one particular branch had gone a different direction? And this is what a skill you can use to analyze your own games and become a better Force of Will player.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a lot of times we've had conversations about bad decision tree analysis previously when we've discussed about the mentality of, like, oh, if I had only done this, or oh, because you did this, I lost. Like, that's bad decision tree analysis. That's looking at, like what you said, a single moment in time, a single action, and like getting totally fixated on like that one path. But then
do we get to go back to thought mentality?
Yeah,
my favorite.
We're going back to that mentality. But when you talk about, like, what does it mean to actually look at a decision tree? It's like, look at the flow of every single little thing and try to identify where was the point that if you had done something different, what could have changed about that outcome? Because I think it's different to say, oh, well, I know what would have happened if I had just done this instead. And it's like, well, do you, like, actually, if you sit back and think about it, like Brandon is saying in this moment, take the example of your opponent plays a Wings of an Archangel with no flyers on board, you have a Seal of Lenneth, and you have a Kaguya in hand. Like, in that moment, you have a decision to make that's, yes, which one do I do? But then only later in looking back about, well, what did the rest of that game look like, lets you make a decision about which one of those decisions was the correct one. And then you can start to take that experience and apply it into a new knowledge. So, like, if you went the Kaguya route, right, in that instance, and then later on in the course of the game, having that Kaguya would have been more important later, as opposed to a pretty unimpactful Regalia play that turn where you were just being reactive. Then you get to start to learn it, and you can start to be like, okay, I don't want to fall into that trap again. I've gone down that branch, and I know that it's not a good path for me. So you can start to apply it to your future games. I see Mike nodding his head a bunch. I'm interested about what his thought, like what
there's something deep going on in Mike Rance's brain. There always is.
Hey,
No,
the puns continue.
But I'm on the same boat pretty much with you guys here, because I always think about decision trees in terms of just like, so a lot of Force Will decks have a focus. People always talk about how Force Will can be compared to Magic, but it's such two different things to compare. With Magic, it's like you talk about these modal spells. You talk about, all right, cool, I'm going to hold my mana for this. I'm going to not play this. I'm going to do this because it's a slow game. You want to think about things pretty, rigorously. With Force Will, it's like if one wrong decision on the decision tree can escalate the game completely in a different direction than where it was going from another decision. And I think that's like something really interesting about this format in particular. Previous formats we've had, like, a lot of decision trees have been kind of stifled by cancel wars, when we had stuff like, Fairy Spell versus Fairy Spell versus Fairy Spell, Lorite versus Lorite versus Lorite. You had a lot of stuff like that kind of plaguing the metagame and making it so that...
This man goes for Fairy Spell and not Severing Wind.
Listen, we don't talk about the dark times, but... If we want to talk about it, we can just go into the Otherworld Dreams, thought control, Otherworld Dreams, thought control, Otherworld Dreams, thought control.
Yes.
But no, I think you're right in the sense of there's a difference between when you get into that kind of permissions format, where it's like where there's so much permissions everywhere, as opposed to like interaction. Because I think interaction and permissions are different. Like inherently.
Exactly.
Permissions are a form of interaction because you're telling your opponent no, right? But like
It's the best interaction.
But like, there's a difference between that and like, say, the way tempo interacts with your opponent. Like that is a completely different concept. And so when you start to get into a format like we have now, where there's not a lot of permissions per se, and it's more like tempo-based oriented format, where I'm not stopping, like trying to tell you can't do that. It's just like, do I also want to be doing something right now?
Right. And the big thing is that like this format has a lot of really like there's a lot of super high power level combinations in this format. There's a lot of like just high ceiling things that can happen, but there's just enough really efficient answers, and answers that like require a lot of thought between the two players, like where you have to kind of play this game of chicken in order to get either your combo through or to make sure that your opponent knows they're not getting the combo through. Like for example, I've been trying different versions of the Ouroboros combo because it's a 2-card combo that kills your opponent. I'm like, cool, this seems like a good combination of cards. It wins the game with 2 cards. What can I build around it? But even when you have it built around, say I was running an Atom version that ran Kaguya, because I'm like, all right, I can either OTK them on 2, or I can just make them not able to play the game on 2. You know, 2 sides of the same coin. But
Ryan joining us here.
Now what's going on here? This YouTube overlay is not good for 5 people.
Oh, is it not good for 5 people?
We're gonna find out.
You could be here. You could be here, buddy. But like,
Yeah,
to go with what you're saying, Mike, in the sense of building around it and everything else, since his level of interaction is like, I find myself that I think, unlike what we've seen before in metas where we have these like very high powerful combos, the answers that we've been printed are efficient enough but also generic enough that like it's not like oh, nobody's gonna play that card. Like, you always kind of have to be cognizant of that, because those cards are common enough or can do enough outside of just being an answer that suddenly you have to consider them more often. Because we've definitely had formats in the past. I think back to what's the one that I can like think clearly as like the most clear back to, like Down the Drain, right? Like way back then, like Down the Drain, super efficient answer card, but like actually outside of killing fire resonators, it just didn't do anything, right? So it
was called the anti-Billy Buttons card.
Yeah, it's a very niche efficient removal card. But then when you have that, it's like, okay, you don't always have to consider playing around that. What if I'm just not going to play fire resonators? Okay, cool. Or if the meta is like not really heavily built towards that aggro stuff, you're probably not going to see Down the Drain as much. And so like that kind of stuff. But when you look at cards like Morning Angel, when you look at cards like Crystallization, when you look at cards, what are some of the other ones that I'm thinking of? Like Pierre. I'm naming a lot of white cards, but like Pierre. When you look at Soul Hunt. When you look at things like that, those are cards that even without using them as like a quote unquote answer, they have a lot of utility and potential use, right? So you have to start, and they're efficient for what they're doing. So then you have to start kind of considering like, okay, do I take the risk of this? I almost find myself in the games that I have been playing saying more often than not, you got to force your opponent to have it. But I'm not even sure if that's the right mentality to have in this format, because sometimes you can just get like wrecked by that. And Ryan's over there talking to Camilla.
I'm trying to figure out what's going on Ryan's screen.
Everybody in the chat say happy birthday to Camilla, because it's Camilla's birthday. Happy birthday, Camilla.
Happy birthday, Camilla.
I don't think she can hear a thing.
Well, they can still see it in the chat. So in the chat, let's give some happy birthdays. But that's what I'm talking about, in the sense of like, you actually have to be, to go along with the tree puns, right? Oh, there they're gone. Then they're back. This is a travesty of my podcast.
I apologize. We're good.
It's all good.
Really there is actually to come join.
There is a lot of to go along with the puns. You do actually have to be kind of tending and being mindful and looking at the decision trees within your testing to really start to see where those proper paths are. What directions do you need to be going? Because I think we've discussed this before. This is a format where in the first 3 or 4 turns, making the wrong decision can potentially just end it.
Oh, absolutely.
And so, go ahead, Brandon.
Oh no, I was just gonna really echo what you just said there. I have felt like I have been deep in the tank on turn 2 with my Kaguya's, and they did a thing that I'm like, oh, I could Kaguya this. And I like really, and I like, I mean,
Just like that.
and I sometimes, yeah, it's exactly that. And I like feel like that moment when I'm on a stone and an energized, they called their second stone and they play their thing, and I'm just like, this is the game right here. Like I'm about to win or lose based on this decision, and I mean that's part of, and I think that's a lot of fun. Some people might not, but like that tree it will decide the rest of this game in a way that maybe some formats haven't before, and it's a lot of fun.
I think we had that a little bit in like the Worlds format where DBV had just come out, because you also had Lorite in the format, and there was a lot of responses and stuff you could do for that, and that format was ridiculously difficult to play, especially in green white mirrors. But like for the past 2 sets, like Kaguya has been a deck, but like it's been such a much easier decision to just Kaguya whatever they play, because then you could set up your Chant of Tranquility, you'd get it back anyway, you'd have another Kaguya, and it was just so good to do. When Lorite existed, like a lot of random decks would just be able to Lorite your Kaguya, and that would make things harder. But now that Kaguya is a lot more vulnerable, like it's harder to resolve Chant of Tranquility, when 1 mana instant speed kill your guy is super prevalent in almost every single deck. Even like Arla's 1-drops are just like powerful 1-drops that also can just kill things for free. Like it's just the decision trees have definitely gone back up, where before it was only in the green white mirror, but now like what you're saying is like counterspell on 2 is sometimes not always just the obvious play again. Yeah. It's like a weird place we've come back to.
Yeah, I've definitely had some moments where playing with some of the rogues, like I've done that like traditional, just like, oh, I've got it, Kaguya on 2, and then later I'm just like, man, if I had a Kaguya right now, I'd feel really good. And maybe I didn't really need to cancel that thing way back before. Like, what was it actually doing?
We're going to mention Kaguya a lot because she's the kind of card that makes a lot of decision trees. But no, this kind of thing is relevant in Melgus mirrors. I mean, like I've been playing lots of Melgus lately, and like the second, like you're looking at your hand of 2 mana, and like, am I levitating here? Am I like doing the like shock? Am I setting up Shakti? Like what am I like the what you're doing with your mana is very important in that game too. So it's like you really just have to like go back into your games and say, what would have happened if I had done this just a little bit differently?
Like Melgus mirrors, for example, it's like if they have a medium-sized dude and you have a small dude and a big dude, like, do you attack with your little dude? And then like your opponent has the thought of, do they block with their medium dude, thereby letting your big dude through, but like stopping the small dude from being on board anymore? Like those kind of micro decisions like add up over time, and it's your decision to take that attack or not take that attack, and it's also your opponent's decision to block or not block. Like you have to be looking at your hand thinking 3 turns ahead of, am I going to win by burning them out or a certain strategy? But when you're in the Melgus mirror, like your hand composition is going to determine that, and making those decisions is going to be the make or break. So even if you are like playing the simple aggro deck at Collinsville, like you still have to be so well versed in the mirror to know what role you're taking every single game, like from turn 1 onwards.
If you played Keurig back in the day and you played it because it was a brainless deck, like Melgus is not for you. Like it is not a brainless deck by any stretch of the imagination. It is like actually a relatively difficult deck.
Is Numbing Hedgehog still in the format? Asking for a friend.
It is, yes.
Just wanted to know.
Josh, you've been pretty quiet tonight. What are your thoughts on all this?
I mean, honestly, for me, like decision trees, like that. I mean, everyone's been talking about just playing cards and interactions, and I really thought we'd be going down the rabbit hole of like the free shit that we can do in this format right now. Because that's where, in my mind, like that's where decision trees really get out of control. Is like when you're tapped out and still have obnoxious play lines. Those are decision trees. You know what I mean? And so for me, anytime, so like Alter, I think is the biggest decision tree type deck, because anytime you can fetch, that you can manipulate your board, fetch anything out of your deck, like all of a sudden your decision tree is like you have so many options given whatever situation comes about. So like for me, you know, that's where like decision trees really get crazy. Everything else is pretty manageable, and it just comes from experience. You know, as you play enough decks, the way that I view decision trees is like very early in testing, you try weird things. You find yourself in a situation and like on paper, like I was just having this game with Steven. We were in game 3 of the OLS and I was playing Arla on 2 stones. My stuff was a little weird. I had something on the grave or I had something on the field, and I knew that I could judgment that turn with like 8 things removed, but then I'm like completely tapped out on 3 against an altar deck. And I, at that point, had no idea whether or not that was a good play line or not. Like on paper, I knew it was like, all right, look, this is a great board. There's a lot of RNG in the fact that like I'm looking at the 5 remaining strangers that I have, and only one of them has a butt that's over 1,000. So like I need to hit that to be like kind of safer from the perfect Loki play, which I ended up missing, right? And that's what I ended up losing to. I lost to a perfect Loki play. But that kind of stuff only comes from testing. Like when you're choosing between like 3 play lines, you know, that kind of stuff comes from testing. And when you log enough games and you log enough situations, you can really start to put percentages of success on those. The way that I view it is like, when I'm working a decision tree, I like go from like basically base to tip, right? I try to get to the tip. That's me winning, right? And all the decisions that I make is me trying to move up the tree and staying out of the branches, right? The trunk has the highest amount of success, right? Like that's where like you work your way up the tree. You stay as close to the trunk as possible.
you said base to tip. You went up high for base. You did the reverse. You went base to tip. I was like upside down tree.
But like, yeah, so for me, it's like as you're logging games and everything, and as you're figuring this stuff out, you can really start to put percentages of success. So like in my head, like Brandon's example that he was saying in the very beginning, there is no world where I'm not coggying your Regalia on 2. If I can absolutely coggia your Regalia and like that's your play, if your turn is like, I'm going to tap out and play this, but I can cancel that like all day. There's like, and that's just because I've logged enough games to know that is a stellar play line.
And I think that's what we're talking. I think that's what we're talking about like looking at how you analyze your games. Like you're saying in the sense of like looking at what the percentage of when you make that decision, how often does it pay off? And then you get to start seeing the stronger choices versus the weaker choices that maybe need to get pruned or just like knocked out of your brain. Because I think that we can all speak to experiences that we've had where maybe there's a decision line or a thing in a game that you think about doing maybe once or twice, and then you try it, and then once you try it, you can just start reminding yourself, no, don't ever frickin' do that again. Like just like you can remind yourself that, but like that comes from putting in the grind and trying those things out and really kind of doing the what I'm trying to think of a pun, but I'm not going to. Doing the work to like actually see exactly where, you know, how strong that branch is really. And so I think that you're absolutely right. And I think that I know that some of the players in this game, some of the people in the community have expressed frustration with the size of the decision trees when you start to incorporate things like the free stuff. Like that is something we see in the community being discussed. Like the altar, you know, when it was heavy altar format, even before this versus pretty much anytime it's been heavy altar format, like that's a big thing that comes into play. Is people being like, well, there's so many different possibilities of what you can do, you know, like, so that's frustrating and that's super complicated.
And that's exactly what it is. It is complicated, and that's why I have a very difficult time when the community as a whole decides to go on like the rants and the bandwagons, usually about the best decks. The best decks are usually the ones that have the biggest decision trees. Like very rarely are they the ones that are just as straightforward as like I'm gonna play Regalia on 2, Resonator on 3, blah blah blah, Judgment on 4. You know what I mean? Like these most powerful decks ends up being the ones that have a bunch of free stuff that are very difficult to play against because you have to play around many different things and you have to have a full understanding of the chase. When stuff is free, you have to have a full understanding of the chase because that's just the way that like those games end up going. And so I can understand as a casual player, if you do not have a complete understanding of the rules, and if you don't want to know all 40 cards in your deck, those things are hard to play. Those decks are hard to play.
I'd also just warn anyone against like Force to Will as a game if that's a problem to you, because like this game is wildly more complicated than like Magic or Hearthstone or anything like that. And I'm not saying that to like try and scare anyone off. I'm just saying that like this game is very complicated, that it's part of the conceit of wanting to play it competitively. And so
Yeah.
like
I agree. I agree wholeheartedly.
We're at a spot right now, and this was like partially like I made a comment on Lars's post about like how do you feel about decision trees, which I feel like might have inspired this question. But like I think Alter in particular, like whenever that card is good, it is like not only the hardest deck to play, but it is even harder to play against that deck. And like
for sure.
When Alter exists, like the options that you constantly have available are you can search your deck for any resonator at instant speed, the timings of which, like you're saying, you need to know the chase because you need to know when you're able to stack your resonators to beat something like enchantment removal or addition removal. And then like once you hit the threshold of 3, you not only have access to almost every resonator in your deck, but one of those resonators is Kaguya, so now you just have a cancel spell for free, or you can get Athenia and untap 3 stones while you're tapped out to have access to your entire hand. And while that is difficult enough to like play as the Alter player and make those correct decision trees, playing against an Alter that gets stacked is actually impossible because you do not have the information of every single like rogue card that your opponent is playing in their deck. And if you like play into the Alter and you like try to bait out the Athenia effectively or try and bait out the Kaguya effectively, and then they just don't do anything, and then like actually I'm going to stack my Alter like 3 more times and then bust out an Athenia or a giant that has barrier 4, and now you can never answer because it's like even immune to perfect Loki. Like you need to have advantage effects. Like there's so many like errors of knowledge that you have to have about your opponent's hand, deck, and like everything that it feels ridiculously overwhelming to play against, not just because of how complicated it is to begin with, but just because like how like the tree becomes a forest at that point when it gets more than 2 counters on it, and it's just ridiculous.
And I think Alter is I think the most recent like it's come and gone in terms of like why it creates it. Go ahead.
I don't think the power level of Alter is very high.
Sure.
Like, I actually don't think the power level is a problem. It's literally just the fact that the decision trees and suddenly the skill that comes into every single turn when an Alter hits the field becomes ridiculous.
Oh yeah,
even if it's
wholeheartedly agree.
Hard, it's like crazy. So
wholeheartedly agree. Which is I think why when we've seen the prevalence of Alter ebb and flow based on the types of things that Alter is like looking to try to grab and the ease of which we were playing Alter, right?
I feel like the fact that the Alter Kaguya deck is like such just a prime example of what we're talking about here. Like we're going to end up talking about Alter Kaguya a lot.
I'm trying to talk about this is not the only time that this has happened in Forcible's history. I think this is just the current one, and I think that again, what we've seen even with this particular card that we're talking about, we've seen an ebb and flow of like how much it influences the trees. But I think that speaks to the fact that you kind of always need to be learning. Like I think you always need to be investigating. You always need to be reading into stuff. You always need to be kind of discussing cards like this. But like in Forcible's history, we have had cards that have opened up massive decision tree situations. Even to the point of like way back to like OG Reflect Refrain. Right? Like when you had OG Reflect Refrain, like that also, even the fact, like, let's even go back as far as pre-errata OG Reflect Refrain, right?
Never do that.
Let's never do that. But like in that context, like you had an effect that you could activate literally every single turn, but it had 3 modes. When were you going to do it? When was it important enough? Were you going to do it before your opponent did it or after your opponent did it? Which is why you saw which is unfortunately why so many of those games went to time. Like because no one the game was still young, so like the practice of like getting into those grinds and having so many options and both players having it and the complexity of it, like you just kind of get like Ryan said with Alter, so complex and overwhelming that it's just like daunting to play and it's daunting to play against. But Reflect Refrain is a poor example because Reflecting Refrain by itself was so insanely powerful. Alter is a newer example that has shown this kind of ebb and flow, but still speaks to the importance of understanding trees and looking at the trees and being able to make those decisions about, like Josh has said, if I make this decision here, what's the percentage of times that it's going to pay off? If I do this, what are my opponent's potential options? How often is that going to pay off against me? Like that kind of stuff. And I think that is a layer of testing that is beyond just how does my deck do, or did I make the right decision this time, or did I have the answers in my hand? Like there's so much more depth and to it than just like looking at in the moment, did you win or lose the game?
Yep. Yeah, and I think the other thing that I've noticed, especially with this altar deck, is the decision tree of board management. I think is also like probably the biggest thing with the SIG altar deck. Is I've seen it played out multiple times at this point, and I know that everyone's trying to kind of figure out what to do, because once you get the ball rolling or you get some kind of combo going, you got to know when to stop. You got to know when the value you're getting out of continually sacking, getting altars, Athenias, maybe some Sephiroths, like you got to know when that value like actually gets worse than just leaving more 8/8s on the field and going that route. You know what I mean? So like there's that aspect. I know in the very early iterations of this, there was a huge like running through the whole play line in like one turn instead of leaving out like a bunch of stuff. I know me personally, my play style, I will leave an altar on the field often, like going into my opponent's turn. I want that altar there. But I've seen a lot of people overreach and go for the discards and go for the ramp style, and they would leave themselves without an altar. I've seen the deck played out many different ways, and board management I think is one of the biggest ones with that deck that I think a lot of people are going to struggle with, because you still have to swing and you still have to win. You know what I mean? So like you can do your combo, you can ramp your stones, but you put all your eggs in that graveyard and you miss up one time, you gonna lose that graveyard.
Arla flip, honestly, like it just happens.
Yeah, I mean,
turning into a Kaguya altar support chat, which is wonderful. I do want to talk about that.
I would actually even go.
How do we play this deck?
Yeah,
I would go one format back to the decision tree is kind of there. The consequences there, I think, were really last format felt very OTK.
What's last format? Like,
Machina, Trisha, Zalus, Huanglong Zalus, like OTK'd very often in that format. Like if you had one slip up, it was like that next turn, you were either dead or like severely crippled. And so like I'm still kind of playing out this one. I think the same stuff could happen here, but it's not as fast as it was last time. But I think that was like a lot of the decision trees from last format were like, if you messed up somewhere along the way and didn't account for an OTK, like oftentimes you were getting clapped that way. And so
I think it's a similar thing to last format, except last format you literally died the turn after you flipped up. This format you are dead, but you're not literally going to die for a couple turns. Like if you
it's like
let,
a bleed out. It's like a bleed out.
If you let that deck untap uncontested, you are dead. Like it might take a second, but you're done.
I'm talking about the SIG deck, right?
on the next episode of
I'm
Rose,
talking about the Stig deck and the Arla deck. I think both of them that applies to.
Well, see, and I've had, so like the Arla,
And
like,
the Reser deck, all of them actually, literally all three of the best decks in the format.
but like that was actually something like I highly recommend like doing that. Like give yourself a chance to, like when you're playing the deck, like tap out against Sig Altar and just like really feel what the worst that could happen is, and do it a couple times in your testing, so that way.
It depends on the build too, right? Because if I just sit down across from a random Sigurd deck, like I don't know how deep their part repower goes. Like maybe they just play like the one Griffin, and that's the worst that's going to happen. Maybe they play like some worse stuff. Maybe they play like the end of friendship, and they play like Makotos or Giants or something. And like when I sit down across from a Rezard or a Hanzo or an Adam, like I don't really know what I'm in for until I get like through game one almost. So it is really hard to like say, like some of the builds that I've made of Kaguya Hanzo are very, very tight. Like really, if like the idea is you don't let me tap out, you don't tap out against me because you're afraid of what I can do, but I don't really have much besides like a couple Sephiroth loops, but it's really not like an extensive amount because the deck space is so tight to be doing what the deck wants to do. But if I go into a Grand Prix and I'm against somebody else, it's like I really can't afford to do that because you could just dump out way more than I'm able to deal with ever. So it's really
okay.
This
Time
is a
out.
little bit of a
Never
cheeky
ever, I apologize. Never ever just like tap out on like in a GP. That's not what I was saying. Like I was saying, like if you're tapping out in GPs, you better know that that's like a 90% win rate on whatever the hell you're doing.
No. What are you talking about? I'm going to sit down and put my Melgus down against you, and I'm going to tap out every turn until you're
deck
dead.
is actually pretty safe to do. Like I'm probably going to cocky your stuff, but if I get an uncontested altar, I'll just get like 2 Athenias on the board and call it a day. Like I'm just going to like leave an altar on the field and say that's my win condition. You can't beat me having an altar and 2 guys on the field. But like the actual punish is not like I'm not playing Griffin currently.
I think that if you are playing a deck in the GP that like loses to Kaguya, you're a fool. Like I just don't think that deck is going to exist. Like or you will beat yourself the Kaguya deck. It's like I think that you'll find that there are some tap out decks that can do it, and we'll see if those actually come into fruition.
Well, I think the biggest thing here is, you know, with having all these options, having all these different ways, the real key here is to, you know, we've had it asked in the chat, like, do you just throw yourself in your testing? Do you just throw yourself into making some bad plays? And I think the consensus here in the group is absolutely yes. Like whether it be just like, because like what's the worst that can happen? You learned something and don't do it again. Like that's the worst. Like, you know, like there's no downside to just like we've had this conversation before about like what generates true testing and what does true testing look like? And true testing at the end of the day isn't haha I beat all my friends. Like true testing at the end of the day is no, not that. True testing at the end of the day is like where you can walk away from the set and say, okay, I feel like I understand my deck better. I feel like I understand the meta better. I feel like I will do better next time I play.
And you can say, haha, I beat all my friends.
And you can also sometimes happen to say, haha, you beat all your friends. But that's not the goal, right? And so I think sometimes is, you know, just being willing to just say, like Josh said, tap out here, see how it feels. If it feels real bad, then you've learned don't tap out here, you know? But if it works, you can start to see, like Josh said, you know, you start to see the theory of if I have a Kaguya and my opponent taps out on 2 to play Regalia, I'm absolutely canceling that 100% of the time. Like you can start to formulate those game plan decisions better, and it's better to have those like that training in your brain prior to an event, because also at an event you're on a clock. So if you feel more comfortable with those decisions, when you feel more custom and you're not like blindsided with, oh shit, what do I do here? You're also advantaged that way because you're not eating into your own time thinking about it. You can go, okay, my opponent's doing this. I've experienced this before. This is how it's played out. I'm going to make this action. And then you're better. You're just better for that.
You're better.
Yeah, you're just better.
You're just better. You're just better.
Roller School TCG, you're just better.
You're just better.
Tagline of this entire series.
Oh my god, is Taylor still here? Can you make me a graphic with that, please? Roller School, you're just better.
You're just better.
That's the next piece of merch. There you go. If you want that kind of merch, join us as a member on the channel so you can afford to hire a tailor to commission for us.
Hire a tailor.
Rent a tailor.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
So I think, is there anything else that we have to say about decision trees?
Nope.
No.
I don't know. Do we get to the root of it?
I've been
I
given
think I would like to
Facebook messages.
I would reiterate Brandon's fact. Like, if you do not like thick, awesome decision trees, maybe Force of Will is just not hit.
Point where the best decks are very intense on what you can be doing, and it's like the Stranger deck also makes it kind of weird too, because just the like get a random stranger into your decision trees, then also has to evaluate the 5 to 10 strangers that you could remove from the game or put in your graveyard or add to your hand.
Oh, we didn't even get to like tracking your opponent's decision trees, like looking at what they're doing and trying to ascertain what they have in their hand because of it. Like, oh, there's so much more depth we could do to this.
I mean, we can keep talking. I'm down for it.
I mean, like the TLDR is like when you see your opponent make a line that is like suboptimal, you get to rule out the 7 better decision trees most of the time, unless your opponent's just like not the player you took them to be, right? Like that's how it goes.
Unless they're just big braining you.
Yeah, unless they're big braining you is really what's going on there. But like when your opponent like could do something and they do something worse, you get to say, okay, this card, this card, this card, this card are just not in your hand right now. So then next turn I get to play with that information.
I think that I think my favorite example of this is I can't remember which event it was, but I think it was the Wanderer GP, and I think I was watching a match. I think I was commentating a match of Ryan. And Ryan had not played any discard spells that game. He was playing Sherry against, I don't know what he was playing. And at some point in time, his opponent makes a decision, and Ryan is sitting on like 4 will, and he's got a couple quick cast cards in hand, but a couple other things. And his opponent has like 3 or 4 cards in hand. And based on the decision, I see Ryan sit for a second and then go, okay, you did this, which means you're not going to do this. So your hand is XYZZ. And card for card called the guy's hand, like without seeing it. And I was just like my mind exploded. But like that's absolutely like that's a side effect of being able to even start to understand, which is why we've also said in the past with testing, like play decks that you like play pilot decks that you don't initially plan on playing yourself so that you can better understand them. Talk with your friends about like, okay, why did you do this? Do your testing open-handed. Go back and rewind and try something again. Like the more you understand what other decks are trying to do, the better you'll understand like why they're making certain decisions. So then that gives you an edge. Because if you go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say I was also like not to take away from Ryan's massive genius brain right here, but when you're in like the Wanderer GP was somewhat of a solved format, like solved in huge massive quotation marks. Everybody's either playing Keurig, Sherry, or Mike Sammartino. So
that man with his green grim, bro.
Man's doesn't know no bounds. Yeah. But when you're in a solid format like that, I know that Ryan was like putting the pieces together, but he knew basically the basic structure of the field and was able to determine everything like that. Think about the decision trees that pop out once you realize that we're in a somewhat unsolved format right now, because people are still trying to figure out, what the absolute best combination of cards to play is. Not only that, but like we just got 3 new rulers. Do they come into a factor here? Is Divinity good again? Is Strangers good? Is Alter the best deck? Kagi is obviously stupid. It's just like there's so many things that like culminate to like this like crazy amount of decisions you can make, and if you can call them card for card in a format like this, kudos.
Your opponent might as well concede.
Yeah,
this is your hand. I liken it back to like the situations where I again going back to things that remind me of Ryan, watching people play poker. Like if you see people play poker and you see players who are saying like, this is what you chip, like this is when you raise, this is how much you bet, this is what we're at, your hand is these 2 cards, and like call it. I think 99% of the time I've seen those kind of things play out watching like VODs of poker tournaments. The other player like immediately folds. The other person's just like, well, you got me, you got a read on me, it's perfect, I'm out. Like unless those people are really feeling confident and it's like a bluff out or anything else, but like having
they hit it on the river.
Or they hit it on the river.
Yeah, no, you could absolutely have them nuts on the flop. Know exactly what their hand is. Know that they would have to hit their
out, and then it happens. Right?
Runner up.
You've got an ace, and then an ace comes on the river, and you're like.
Quick poker aside, people wildly overdiagnose how much they can predict other people's hands. Just throwing that out.
Sure,
that is,
but in a game of like
it's also part of the mental game though.
But in a game of Force of Will, I think the difference being there is when you have that kind of insider information, like suddenly, or when you get a sense of that information and you can get a scope of the decision trees.
Or when you play a Look of Corruption.
Right. But like even regardless that.
Dive Makoto the Major.
Like having understanding of like the different avenues your opponent can take and what their strongest like branches that they can take are, and then being able to cut them off before they make that decision or force them into a suboptimal position, like force them to have to make the worst choice. Like you probably don't find yourself being able to do that or find opportunities to be able to do that if you don't put in the work and start doing the analysis of like finding those branches. So we talk about like testing is not just jamming games. There's so much more beyond it, and this is just one more layer of like, especially in a format like this that is like unsolved and has so much opening, and also in general in US metas, because US metas have never really been solved because people will bring whatever the heck they want to a GP. Like it's just like that's true.
On that note, the actual like highest voted deck on my poll was Ghost in the Shell, and everything else was just like a meme or something. It was like sad European music, and then it was like Ghost in the Shell, and I'm like, are people?
Dude, I'm not gonna lie. Like, we're gonna show up in college
Are you
and
actually
be
gonna
like
bring that
Tron
back?
meta, and I'm gonna be like, well, I didn't like prep for this.
I think if everyone's playing Kage Alter, I'm playing Aramaki. That's not a troll. It's 100% truth.
Wow.
I mean, yeah, no, I could see that.
100%.
That's crazy.
Absolutely.
I think that's like a good matchup, having not played it at all. So yeah. No,
So there are 4 stones that say humans can't be canceled.
Yep. But oh god, no.
that
I tried that. We're not
It
playing
works.
white.
It
No,
We're
works.
not playing white.
Tron,
No,
right?
you have
Anyway.
to be all Tron.
This
You
is
have to
this
be
is
all Tron.
this is
Never.
even this interaction in general, I think is speaking to the fact of like doing that kind of testing, doing that kind of decision tree. Like we just saw 2 very different paths about what we could see.
Ryan,
about white, we saw
made
white
fun of
for
Cal
Aramaki, and we saw black / all in on Tron for Aramaki. Those are 2 very different trees, right?
very different.
So like
I literally.
I'll take that stone as a sideboard card. How about that?
Cal said the
need
same thing to me, Ryan, and I made fun of him. I said, Cal, that's not a real deck. That doesn't work. You play against it, and they have like 15 cards left in their deck on turn 4, and you're like, this is unbelievable how much value it generates.
One thing I do want to talk about though before we like get off the topic
Sure.
if you really want to mind game your opponent, and this is I might have done this once, and I did it like not on purpose, but it worked. Like, just tell your opponent. Like I love bantering, right? And I, like Jeremy said, I'll tell my opponent, like I'll talk out loud and like reason through, like, oh, you have this card, and like seeing their reaction kind of helps me figure it out. If you have no idea what cards in your opponent's hand, just say you've got this card, this card, this card, and this card, and then they'll be like, that's all wrong. And like maybe they won't say it out loud, but like they'll think like this guy has no idea what I have. Really, you have given away no information, and you still are just like playing around everything. But now your opponent will think that, oh, they're not going to play around this card because they don't think I have it. And then you play it, they have an answer like, whoa, how'd you save that answer if you didn't think I had this card? And you're like, aha, I'm an idiot, and I had no idea what was in your hand.
Just call the flies like dragon.
No. You say that to me, then I mind game you right back and say, God, he's right.
Dude, yeah.
Then we're
All right.
going first.
Can we go back to the
if you want to
ultimate
get into
trolls?
Jedi mind tricks, I
I
recommend
do
going
not
and reading
condone Jedi mind tricks. This is
Patrick.
a
Go read
low-tier
Patrick
way to play.
Chapin's flipping Art of Magic or whatever it is. It's a fantastic book, but like you will absolutely like if that is literally one of the most satisfying things you can do in a game of Force of Will is if you mind F your opponent. Like it feels great.
I have only done it once, and and I'm glad that you can't possibly do it this way anymore. And I would never actively advocate for somebody to do this. But back in the era of when I was playing competitively, back in the era of I have 2 bad stories about this. Back in the era of where you didn't reveal your ruler until post mulligans, but we started getting will coins. I would actively put the will coin of a character of a ruler that was nothing even remotely similar to what I was playing, and I did get people to mulligan wrong.
Can't we just play good, clean games of Magic? Why do we have
Never.
Good, clean games are just online games. We play in paper for a reason. God, I cannot play online card games anymore.
Yeah.
I'm going crazy.
Yeah.
I need to be in person so I can stare into your soul and fuck with you. That is like
No, it's literally like that's the thing.
worst
like
part
when you're
about
sitting
that is so many people think they have this edge when they just absolutely don't. Like I hear maybe Ryan and you and this like group is like fine, but so many casual players like at my locals will be like, you'll never guess what incredible mind trick I came up with, and it's just like nonsense, and like they wildly overdiagnose how much it works, and it just irritates the shit out of me. Like just play clean games. Like it's not that big of a deal. Like play clean games.
Hot takes. Let's go.
That's my hot take of the day. Jedi mind tricks are stupid. Just play good games.
And on that note, mind your trees. We tend a wonderful tend a wonderful garden of trees. Plant trees and save the world. Sow the seeds. Trim the branches that you need to trim off.
Sow the
have a
seeds
good
of
night.
chaos in your opponent's minds. That's next week's.
That is how to mind trick your opponent. That's next week's podcast. Here at Ruler School, you're just better. This podcast got wildly out of hand, and I love it. So for that, to end us out, I do want to say thank you to the 2 new members we had join us tonight. Not enough to get us a new Keurig emote for Ryan, despite it. Mike, you got something else to say before we close it out?
Yes, I need to end with another tree pun. What's your favorite evergreen mechanic?
Okay.
Remnant.
There we go.
What was it?
Is it just like end it on that?
Evergreen mechanic.
Yep. And on that, again, if you liked what we did tonight and you want to support us,
life break because I want to end your life for that. I'm sorry.
If you like what we did tonight and you want to see more of it, please consider clicking that join button down below, and also just go ahead and subscribe and give us a little like, or click the bell so that you're notified when we go live next week or when we have regular feature match footage again coming soon, hopefully.
No announcements?
I have. It hasn't been. There's been nothing posted yet. Let me see if I've heard anything. Let me see.
Have to get it in the morning.
You can also tune if there's any kind of news or announcements. We'll probably do a video on it. So if it happens, feel free to let us know. Yep, nothing new there. So thank you guys so much for being here tonight. We hope you enjoy it. As always, this has been myself, Jeremy Franklin, and I've been joined by late edition of Ryan Miles and birthday girl Camilla.
Yeah, birthday Camilla.
Josh Patton.
Mind trick.
Brandon Bremont.
I'd really like to get to the root of these tree puns, and I know it might not make me very popular, and some people certainly pine after them, but I think it's time we all log off. It's been for real until next time.
Did you write that? That has been wrote down for like the last hour.
and Mike Rants.
5 steps ahead of me.
And Mike Rants. Have a good night, everybody. Class dismissed.
But